I'm May, and welcome back. Today, my project is going to be a puffy sleeve tiered dress, and I am using secondhand fabric that I found at a thrift store. I'm going to be using this top sheet that I thrifted a couple months ago because I thought it would be perfect for a spring dress. And the amount that a top sheet provides is pretty perfect for all of those ruffles and tiers that we're going to be creating. So if you can find one of these, highly recommend. If not, grab 4 or 5 yards of fabric and we can get sewing. Step 1 is to take a couple of measurements. I'm trying to figure out how long I would like the tiers to go. I'm gonna stop right above my knee, and then how long I would like the sleeves to be. And lastly, from my shoulder to my armpit, just how big I want those puffy sleeves to be. Starting with the top bodice, I am using a crop t-shirt that fits me pretty well. I usually sleep in it, so it's a little bit baggy. I'm getting the neckline and the armhole silhouette, and then I'm just going to be cutting directly around it. I'm not leaving any seam allowance because I want the bodice to fit a little tighter than this t-shirt. This is actually the back panel that I cut on the fold. For the front panel, because I want that V-neck, I am actually going to cut it on 2 layers of fabric, so not on the fold. And I'm going to cut a little seam allowance along the front, which is where those 2 panels will be joined. And then for the front, I want the neckline to go a little lower, so I'm just cutting that out. So here are my 2 pieces for the front bodice. And I am going to sew them right sides together, so you can see the part of the fabric that's a little brighter. That's my right side. I'm going to take that and pin along. I'm finding how deep I want that little neckline to be, that opening at the neck, and then I'll sew up until about 5 inches from the top. Taking it to my sewing machine, starting at the top with about a 1/4 inch seam allowance on the side, and just a straight line down. And here she is all sewn together. And now I'm going to take that back bodice that we cut out and right sides together, pin it to the front bodice. And we will be connecting at the shoulders with one straight line. Here it is all connected and right sides out, and it's starting to look like a tank top. Next, we're going to work on finishing up the neckline with just a small rolled hem. So I'm taking the fold once, folding it over twice, and then I'll pin, and then continuing up the neckline and all the way around. Taking it to the machine. This part can be a little tricky, especially when we come to those corners of the neckline where it dips down into the V. But just take it slow, and you can always pull things out and redo it. That's happened to me plenty of times. So here I am coming up on that corner, then I'm going to put the needle down. I'm actually doing a back stitch here. Lift up the presser foot and totally rotate the fabric to then go onto the neckline. And here is the rolled hem all finished. You can iron it if you like it to sit a little flatter, but let's start on the sleeves. I decided that I wanted to keep this already finished hem from the top sheet because I thought it was really pretty. So I'm taking that measurement that I started with before from my shoulder all the way to where I wanted to hit on my wrist. And I'm cutting this sleeve on the fold as well. Right now I'm just making one big rectangle. And now we're looking at how much I want it to gather at the top and how much will be left over at the bottom. Really how billowy this sleeve will be. And I decided that I do want to cut off a little bit. The sleeve is a little puffy for my taste. So I'm just creating a line about 3 inches up and creating a curve all the way to the wrist. Next up is to create a loose stitch around the armhole. And then I'm going to pull that string to create that nice ruffle on our puff sleeve. This is a bit of a process, and you're just looking to see it match up with the armhole with about 1 inch on either side left over, and we'll join the sleeves there later. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to start pinning right sides together. And here's that inch that's left over that's going to hang. So we will start right where the ruffle and the ruching starts and pin it all the way around the armhole. And when you flip it over, it should look like this. Let's sew it all together. Sewing with the ruffles, again, can be tricky, but it just takes some finagling and moving that ruching around, and then it should look like this. I did decide that I wanted the sleeves to come in right at the wrist, so I pulled out my elastic thread, and I'm just going to sew one seam right along the wrist line. So here I am switching out my bobbin. If you've never shirred fabric before, there are lots of videos on it. It's pretty simple once you do it. And this one's a really easy project because it's just the one line, and I'm just sewing parallel to the seam that is already existing from my top sheet. And by some miracle, I have perfectly used up my elastic bobbin. All right, I'm loving the ruffle at the edge of the wrist. And now it's time to join the sleeve at the bottom. And we'll start pinning from the wrist all the way up to the armpit and then down the side of the bodice. I'm really making sure that this armpit seam lines up perfectly. And then we'll sew from the wrist all the way down. And here she is. I'm looking at the sleeve and it's looking a little pillowy for me, so I'm thinking about taking it in a little bit. I tried it on just to test it out. I love the bodice, but the sleeves are big. I feel like I could fly away in these. These are going to need to be taken in. So luckily, to go about this, it won't take too long or ruin much of the process. I'm just going to start from the armpit and cut about 3 or 4 inches up from the wrist. I've cut that off and then rejoined just as we did before, and it looks a lot better. Now it's time to start adding the tiers. For the first tier, I am taking 1.5 times the width of the bottom of the bodice. And that brings us to about 48 inches. So I am taking this on the fold and cutting out my first tier. I am making these about 9 inches high and 48 inches wide. Next step is to sew right sides together just to make that big circle ruffle. And then we'll create a loose stitch to gather it all together for our first tier. Once it's all gathered, you're going to want to check if it's the same as the bodice. I'm making some adjustments here. Now it looks pretty good. I'm going to flip it over top until right sides are together. Join up at the side seams and pin everything in place. Should look like this once everything's turned out. And here she is sewn on. And again, for the second tier, I'm taking 1.5 the width of the newest tier that we added, so it will be a little bit bigger. We're looking at about 56 inches. I am making it 9 inches high and 56 inches long. Same step here, sew it right sides together and make that big circle. This is our second tier. We're going to sew a loose stitch, gather it all together, check that it matches the previous tier, and then right sides together. Let's do it all again. And she's done. Hey, thanks for sewing with me today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you really liked it, subscribe to my channel and we can keep sewing together. Cheers.